And welcome to Rip Off Britain Live, battling once again on your behalf in situations where things have gone very badly wrong.
And a common theme to some of our stories today is that they involve genuinely life-changing sums of money.
Yes, but whether that money's been stolen, lost or owed, we'll have all the advice you need to stop your cash going the same way.
We asked you to tell us what's left you feeling totally ripped off, and you've contacted us in your thousands. You've told us about the companies that you think get it wrong and the customer service that simply is not up to scratch.
As a customer, I was annoyed because I didn't get what they said I was going to get.
You've asked us to track down the scammers that stole your money and investigate the extra charges you say are unfair.
Nothing is safe. There's nothing in this world ever has been made security-proof.
And when you've lost out, but nobody else is to blame, you've come to us to stop others falling into the same trap.
You just get to the point, it's no, leave me alone.
So whether it's a blatant rip-off or a genuine mistake, we're here to find out why you're out of pocket and what you can do about it.
Your stories, your money. This is Rip Off Britain.
Very good morning to you and a warm welcome to Rip Off Britain Live, where all of this week, as well as getting our teeth into the cases that you've asked us to investigate, we've been passing on invaluable tips and advice from our fantastic team of experts. And, of course, today is no exception, is it? No.
Yes, we've another busy programme coming up, and we're hoping you'll be doing what you've done every morning so far and sharing your thoughts on the topics we'll be exploring. You can email us at ripoffbritain@bbc.co.uk, or we're on Facebook, where several of our stories have already produced quite a conversation.
Indeed, and I imagine the same may well happen today, at least we're hoping so. Now, we'll be keeping up the pressure on banks to play fair with people who've been tricked out of their cash, as well as finding out why some housing association residents have been getting sky-high energy bills that they simply can't afford, plunging them into hundreds of pounds worth of debt.
I can't afford to pay those bills. I've got an outstanding bill for £1,084. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm living on the breadline.
That's been a long-running story. We're also going to have a definitive answer to a question that was posed by an awful lot of you after our report yesterday on petrol prices. Plus, of course, we're going to be tackling more of your problems outside in our pop-up advice clinic. We've got personal finance expert Sarah Pennells, who just can't stay away. She's here for a third shift this week. And also back for more, Martin James from the consumer website Resolver.
But first, we're looking at a particular type of cold call that can have the most devastating consequences for your pension.
Take up the offer and you risk losing all those precious savings to fraudsters.
You may have seen the campaign on television. Launched by the government amid fears that every year, hundreds of millions of pounds are being lost to pension fraud.
I worked for just shy of 40 years. But my pension still wasn't going to be enough for us. So when he called out of the blue, offering a free pension review, I was all ears.
Most cases start with that free pension review, and they typically end in the same way as well.
Just shy of 40 years pension. He took all of it.
Of course, for many of the people offered that free review, it sounded all too convincing.
I thought, oh good, this is going to help us.
We thought, well, OK, we'll go with it.
For Denise and Derek Morris from County Durham, it had seemed a timely call because a recent statement had revealed that Derek's pension pot of £59,000, which was frozen after he was made redundant, was losing money.
We were just concerned because we think, oh God, if we leave it until he retires, is there going to be that much left?
So it seemed good news when the company who'd called said it could reinvest the pension to get a better return. The couple agreed to have a representative call round to give them more details.
He was believable. It was like you were talking to a friend. He just seemed as though we could trust him.
The advisor suggested that the couple move their money into a pension scheme abroad to get the best return, and that they could even take out a tax-free lump sum of £15,000.
He said it would grow better. He reckoned that in the 5 years, we would make back that 15,000 easily. And it meant that Derek would retire with a small pension fund.
The rep they were speaking to then put them in touch with a financial advisor who also gave a big thumbs up to the scheme.
They felt that it was a perfect investment for us. They said it was balanced risk, so we went ahead.
But 6 months later, a letter arrived from the pension fund managers warning that they may have been wrongly advised. They were told the fund had been suspended over concerns that it had been badly managed. And when Denise tried calling the financial advisor she'd originally dealt with to find out what exactly was going on, it became clear the company had moved abroad.
I tried to ring them, I couldn't get through, so I sent them an email. I got no answer from the email.
For the next 3 years, Denise battled with a never-ending list of companies and correspondence, trying to track down the £41,000 that Derek had worked so hard to save. But no one seems to know where his money has gone. He'll now need to keep on working for at least 5 more years, and he finds the whole situation impossible to talk about.
I feel gutted, really now, because it now looks like he's lost it. So he's now faced with having to work longer because of a decision I've made.
After looking at Denise's paperwork, we discovered that one of the schemes involved, Trafalgar Multi-Asset Fund, is under investigation by the Serious Fraud Office. It seems a classic case of what's usually called pension liberation. With the promise of high returns and a lump sum incentive, you could be seduced into investments that simply aren't regulated, which has become much easier to do since the rules were relaxed on accessing a pension early. Jenny Ringstead from Bridgend in South Wales was first contacted by a pension liberation scheme back in 2012, but it was only in May this year that the full facts came to light. The cold call she'd received seemed uncannily well-timed.
I was on the computer at the time and we were looking to get a loan because we had so many outstanding debts. On the same day, within no time at all, I had the call about the pension transfer.
On the other end of the phone was a man calling himself Simon Davies, and he was quickly winning Jenny's trust with a promise of ready cash.
The rep was promising that we would have a nice cash incentive to transfer our pension, which immediately caught my interest. He actually seemed to know exactly what I needed at the time. He was very charming.
Jenny had worked for the local council for 12 years, and her husband Mark served 9 years in the RAF, so between them, they'd accrued around £70,000 into their pension pots. Simon Davies told her in order to get the best return, she should reinvest the lot. Jenny decided to transfer just her pension first, but once she received her lump sum of £2,000, she was confident that Simon Davies delivered on his promises. So the couple then invested Mark's pension too, and received a further £8,000.
I was very excited with the lump sum because I actually remember phoning my bills up and saying, money's coming, we'll be able to pay you off as soon as we can.
But although the lump sum had come through, where the rest of Jenny's money had gone was becoming less clear. First of all, she received a brochure from Speedy Cash, apparently a retired benefit scheme, part of a company called Speedy Loans. Never having heard of it, Jenny called Simon Davies to check.
He said, oh, it just seemed to be a better company to put it into, so it was transferred into them. I didn't question it because he said that it was a good company. To be honest, I really wish I had questioned it. I didn't question it.
Simon promised more detail on the investment would come through. It never did.
It was very worrying for me, the not getting the paperwork that I was waiting for. I actually remember feeling absolutely physically sick when I thought about what I transferred and wondering where it was.
Instead, Jenny, after chasing up the company herself, got some devastating news. Speedy Loans had in fact gone bust, just 6 months after Davies had invested her life savings in the company.
I was fuming. I think I remember throwing the phone across the room, just stomping around, shouting, why is this happening to me?
And when Jenny chased Simon Davies for answers, his demeanour changed, and he certainly wasn't going to return her money.
Initially, he just seemed to be so polite, so convincing. But after it had happened and I started emailing, and his emails started coming back and they became shorter, blunter, it was a definite change in personality.
Getting nowhere, Jenny contacted all the organisations she could think of, and even the police, but she says she couldn't get any clear guidance on how to recover her money.
Everybody just told me to wait. Have you ever tried to wait when you have so much on the line? It's not easy.
What Jenny didn't know is that behind the scenes, the police were swinging into action. And hot on the trail of Simon Davies was Colin Briggs, a financial investigator at South Wales Police. It quickly became clear that Simon Davies wasn't Simon Davies at all.
He knew that what he was doing was wrong. He was hiding his true identity from these people.
The real identity of the man who had cold called Jenny was Simon Colfer. He served time for other fraudulent activities and had been declared bankrupt. Colin's investigation established that Colfer had persuaded around 800 people from across the UK to transfer their pension on his advice.
Colfer being a fraudster, fraudsters by nature are very, very persuasive. It's within their nature that they are able to persuade people to hand over all of their assets, and he was well versed at it.
He found his victims through so-called lead generators, people who gathered online data, spotting potential victims who were searching online for loans or credit. By the time the names reached Colfer, there was every chance he knew they had a pension to part with. Every time he signed one up, he netted large percentage fees. He was making in excess of £1 million, but was leaving his victims desperate.
I feel very sorry for these people. They've done nothing wrong, and through no fault of their own, they are now suffering the consequences. And my heart that really does go out to them and what they are going through.
Colin finally brought Colfer to book in April this year, and he received a suspended sentence after pleading guilty to fraudulent trading. The police have seized his assets, and further court hearings will try and determine what money can be returned to victims. But many worry that their pension pots could be gone for good. What's more, the lump sums Colfer persuaded his victims to release from their pensions were subject to taxation, usually around 55%. But many of his clients say that Colfer failed to tell them that, meaning they've been plunged into debt with a taxman. Jenny owes £5,000, and this time there's no longer the prospect of a pension to protect her.
It makes me feel sick to the stomach that things are not going to get any easier. They're only going to seem harder for me, for my husband. I'm shocked that anybody could actually do this to another person. I knew I'd get emotional.
Poor woman.
Not surprising.
Two deeply upsetting stories there, and obviously we're hoping that in each case there's still a chance that they'll get some of their money back.
Well, indeed, there is a glimmer of hope from the liquidator for the Trafalgar Multi-Asset Fund, which was the company in the first of those stories. It says that it intends to continue its endeavours to ensure that the maximum amount possible is recovered for the benefit of the fund and ultimately, of course, for people like Denise and Derek. But it does go on to say that it is too early to estimate what the total recoveries might be.
Well, joining us in the studio today is Nicola Parrish from the Pensions Regulator. Now, I find those stories personally really, really heartbreaking. Would you agree that cold calling seems to be the starting point?
They are really sad stories, I agree, and they have a devastating effect on the victims. Cold calling is a really good sign that you're dealing with a scam. So the most important thing is people are on the lookout for the signs of a scam, and cold calling is definitely one of those. If people get a call out of the blue, just put the phone down and walk away.
I mean, the number of scams that we deal with in the programme, they're just enormous and increasing all the time. Now, the government heralded this fact of banning cold calls, but that doesn't seem to have been effective, really.
Well, I think the ban on cold calls is, the government has said, is due to come in the autumn, and we very much welcome that ban on cold calls and think that will help, certainly. It's not the only sign of a scam, though, so there are other signs that people should be looking out for. And we heard in that clip about offers of a tax-free sum coming out of your pension. That's another good sign. If you hear that, alarm bell should be ringing. Also, exotic investments, that's another sign. Again, if you hear that, put the phone down, walk away, don't part with your money.
So those are the main telltale signs, would you say?
Yep, promises of high returns is another one as well, probably worth people keeping an ear out for that as well.
Are you doing enough as the regulator? I mean, do you have teeth to actually tackle some of these cases?
So our starting point, our first approach is always about making sure that people know what a scam looks like. But we are taking action. So we have a number of ongoing criminal investigations at the moment where we are looking at the behaviour of individuals, and we'll be bringing criminal prosecutions as soon as we can get those cases ready.
Have you had any success, though, so far?
We've had, so earlier on this year, we brought proceedings in the High Court for recovery of monies. We got over £13 million back from 4 scammers who had been found guilty, who had been scamming people's money, and now the independent trustee is getting hold of that money for victims.
Now, very often people like you do mention the Financial Conduct Authority. So let's talk about just briefly how important it is to be aligned to that.
So I would say first thing, if anybody is thinking about investing any money, and of course not all investments are scams, is go to the Financial Conduct Authority's website. There you can find out whether you're dealing with an authorised firm or an authorised individual.
And you can just Google that?
Yeah, you can Google that. And if you're concerned that you might be dealing with a scam, just Google Scam Smart. So Scam Smart, put that into Google, and that will give you all the information you need. It will help you decide whether you are dealing with a scam, but it'll also point you in the right direction so you can check on whether somebody or a firm is authorised.
Well, we have to leave at that point, but we are dealing on the programme tomorrow with cold calls, so we'll be going into it in more depth. But Nicola, thank you very much. Thanks.
Lots of red flags there being highlighted. Very good advice. Well, many thanks for a bumper crop of emails that we got after our stories yesterday. Now, you remember, we talked about what's called your digital assets, which can be all kinds of information, profiles, pictures that you've got online. And we saw how all of the data that one man kept in cloud-based storage facility suddenly just disappeared like that, and he's got no chance of getting it back.
Well, Rona Cameron from Edinburgh got in touch to say that she never saves anything to the cloud. Instead, she backs up everything onto a portable hard drive or a USB stick.
But quite a few of you have pointed out that memory sticks don't last forever either, a fact that Simon Sherrard discovered in the most awful way. He wrote 2 novels and he stored them on a stick, but when he went back to send the samples to a publisher, his complete horror revealed everything had vanished. I do hope you wrote the books again.
Poor man. Well, it seems many portable and hard disk drives only have a shelf life of between 5 and 10 years. And the best advice is to make more than 1 copy of everything and keep one of them away from your normal address. And that's what Pam Jones tells us she already does, using 3 different drives bought at different times in the hope that they don't all die simultaneously. Good thinking, Pam.
Absolutely. Meanwhile, what a nerve we hit with our report on petrol prices yesterday, Julia.
Yeah, when we crunched the numbers, it turned out that supermarket pumps were the cheapest place to fill up. But that prompted lots of you to ask this question. Isn't the fuel from supermarkets poorer quality than petrol or diesel brought elsewhere?
Well, the short answer and the good news is no. Edmund King from the AA tells us if you're buying regular unleaded petrol, it's going to be just as good wherever you buy it. So the only difference, as we saw in the film, is that if you buy it at the supermarket, you'll pay less than if you go to Texaco or Esso or BP or any of them.
All good news. Now, all this week, we've been catching up on issues that we've looked into on previous programmes. And here's one that just won't go away. The devastating effects of fraudsters emptying your bank account is a topic we return to time and time again, not least because in so many of the cases involving an all too plausible scam, the banks simply wash their hands of any responsibility for allowing it to happen.
Good God, somebody's got into my account.
Just burst into tears. It's all gone, the money's all gone.
And it's very easy for them to say, no, it's your responsibility. You pushed the buttons.
Earlier this year, we heard from Stacey Bedford, who'd warned her bank she thought her account was at risk. So when she got a call from someone claiming to be from the bank's fraud team, at first she thought it was genuine and realised the truth seconds too late.
The moment I hit the send button, I just felt that I was all wrong. It was all wrong. what was I going to do? What was I going to do?
Well, I'm sad to say the Rip-Off Britain inbox has plenty of similar stories to Stacey's, and that's not surprising because just last month, shocking new figures published by the banks revealed the scale of this fraud epidemic. In the first 6 months of this year alone, £145 million went missing. That's up 44% on the same period last year. And perhaps what's most worrying is that only a fifth of that cash was refunded by the banks, leaving most victims entirely out of pocket. Customers are estimated to be losing up to £1 million a day in what's called authorised push payment fraud. So could that finally be about to change? With banks under pressure to better protect their customers, the industry's published new proposals that seem to make it more likely that those who've lost out could get their money back. But with banks still having the ultimate decision on that, there are fears it still won't help in the sort of cases we've featured on the programme. Well, with me now is Gareth Shaw from the consumer organisation Which. Gareth, I know that you've been campaigning on this issue for a long, long time. Do you think the measures that are about to come in force will go far enough?
This is a really positive step forward for consumers who've been a victim to this terrible crime, like the people you've just featured there. They've lost life-changing sums of money, and because they've authorised that payment, they've punched in the account details, they've sent it over to what they think is a legitimate firm, they've had no protection. If somebody goes into your account and steals money from it or takes money from your credit card, you have legal protection to get your money back. Whereas if you decide to send that money over, all the bank will say is, we processed that transaction as you asked us, and therefore we can't give you your money back. This code that's being introduced, it's a draft at the moment, it's a voluntary code. We hope all of the banks and payment services providers choose to sign up for it because they want to protect their customers, will mean that if you're not to blame for sending money over to a scammer and the bank has fallen down on its duties to protect you from that scam, it hasn't monitored suspicious transactions, it hasn't taken steps to warn you about scams, then you should get refunded. But there's a big group of people who aren't to blame for this type of scam, and the bank's not to blame. They won't get refunded at the moment, and that's a really, really big issue.
It's rather strange. I mean, the banks are obviously realising they're on the back foot in publicity terms because it's been a kind of win-win situation for them. They've been getting people to go on, do online banking and then saying, whoa, no, sorry, you did it yourself, nothing to do with us. Why are they not stepping up to the plate for this group of people? Because it's not a very large sum involved, is it?
Well, until we got involved in this campaign, banks really didn't know what was going on with this type of scam, and it's been getting worse and worse. You know, the number of people that were affected by push payment scams this year is double the number it was last year, despite the fact that the regulator's looking at this, despite the fact the banks are supposed to be tackling it. They haven't been doing enough to look at the way that money goes in and out of accounts, to flag suspicious payments, to put warnings in front of consumers, even perhaps slow the process down so that people have a bit of extra breathing room when they're sending significant sums of money across. They haven't done that, and the problem's getting worse. And now there's this group of people who aren't to blame, and the bank's not to blame, and they will not get their money back because the banks are saying, well, if we're not to blame, we're not going to foot the bill for this.
And just very briefly, the banks are still going to be the ones who decide.
They will, yes. There's a criteria that consumers have to meet to show that they've acted with reasonable care, but ultimately the banks will decide. But the good news is that consumers can take complaints to the bank and then on to the financial ombudsman if they're not satisfied with the outcome.
Gareth, thank you very much.
Well, I think we all have a bank story to tell, don't we? And I suspect that that's the story that will simply run and run in this programme. Now, while the weather is still surprising us with some lovely autumn, lovely mild weather, most households may have already had the heating on at some point.
But some of you have been telling us that's something you're a little wary of doing, thanks to a problem that we first reported on 6 years ago.
They believed their bills would go down. Instead, they rocketed.
I'm not paying any more of them bills. No, I'd rather leave it off. No, there's no way I'm paying that again.
They're not listening to us, and they're going to make more people into financial hardship.
We had hoped that we'd seen the last of complaints like those. But then Caitlin Boxall got in touch to tell us about the problems that she was experiencing in the home that she shares with her mum, Marissa. After experiencing issues with antisocial behaviour on their old estate,
Caitlin, what do we want for dinners this week?
Marissa and Caitlin were thrilled to move into this new, affordable housing flat in Welling on the outskirts of London in September 2017.
When I walked in, I thought it was really nice. It was just ideal, really. It felt really homely.
It was a lovely area, neighbours were lovely, and we were just really excited about starting our life in our new home again.
But neither had any inkling that the heating system installed in their home, made by Swedish company Nibi, would, for them, prove costlier than they'd expected.
I'm a single mum, Katie's a student, so we don't really have an extravagant lifestyle.
Yeah, we don't spend a lot. We don't really go out a lot. So our life has always been fine with finance, really, up until now.
Having paid around £80 a month for gas and electricity in their previous address, there was no reason to think they'd be paying much more in their new home.
The way the housing manager spoke to us, it was quite simple. It's like we had nothing to worry about. Everything here was fine.
All I knew was that it's electric only. And so I thought, well, if it's electric only, it would be cheaper because then I haven't got the gas bill. That's how I understood it, but we never got a booklet.
Yeah.
Nothing at all was told us about the system at all.
Marissa says their energy supplier suggested a £60 direct debit should be more than sufficient to cover the bills. And as that was £20 less than they were previously paying, they naturally assumed that going forward, they'd be likely to make a saving. But that illusion was quickly shattered when, some 7 months later, they received a most unwelcome letter in the post.
It wasn't until after Christmas that we actually got a letter telling us about our over £1,000 worth of debt.
I just thought there must be a mix-up from the previous tenant and maybe a debt had been left from the person before.
No such luck. It soon transpired that the £1,000 debt was theirs and was down to what they say their energy provider described on the phone as a ridiculously high level of electric use.
We was really baffled by it. We didn't know how that could be possible.
And Marissa claims that after speaking to her neighbours, she wasn't alone in feeling she was paying more than expected for her electricity.
I said, excuse me, can you tell me how much you pay for your electric? When she said to me, £16 a day, I couldn't believe it. Just couldn't believe it. And then we visited another neighbour. She had a bill for £7,000.
To Marissa, it seemed the Nibi system must be the explanation. But she couldn't understand why, even when it was apparently on full pelt, it wasn't keeping her warm.
You could feel it within your bones, your feet. Absolutely just freezing cold. You couldn't get to sleep through being so cold. And yet the system was on all the time.
Yeah, as far as what we knew, the heating was on the highest setting and we still was barely getting any heat from the radiators.
The whole situation was just spiralling out of control.
There's been times where I've sat in cold baths.
The Housing Association wasn't able to tell her what was going wrong. And in the meantime, her bills were mounting to a level she could not afford to pay. In cases like this, Nibi has always maintained that there's nothing wrong with its system, blaming problems on poor installation, user error, or indeed on the housing associations for using the wrong building specifications. But critics believe that this particular unit, called an exhaust air heat pump system, while operating well and efficiently in some British homes, may not be suitable for all the ones in which it's been installed. Not least because while it's supposed to work by recycling the heat within your home, in probably every situation we've looked at, it seems those higher bills have been caused by the system's more expensive backup immersion heater kicking in instead. And it seems that's what's happened here too. When a Nibi engineer came out to inspect the system, he found that, for whatever reason, it was on the wrong setting, resulting in Marissa's sky-high charges. But Marissa's confidence in her heating system has been disastrously knocked.
What I would like to happen is just for the Housing Association for just to rip out all the NIBI systems and just install gas, because it would just resolve the situation completely.
At the end of the day, if nothing happens, we can't stay here. It's impossible.
The Housing Association, Orbit, has told us that it's invested £13 million in the last 5 years to improve the energy efficiency of its homes. It says it's investigating this issue and will replace the system if it's defective. But, as we've highlighted before, stories like this aren't restricted to just one estate. Thousands of these particular heat pump systems have been installed nationwide, with housing associations among the biggest customers. But after residents complained they'd been hit with bills they couldn't afford to pay, a few have ripped them all out and replaced them. We were there when that happened on one estate in Runcorn. And back in 2015, we met the residents on this estate in Salford, Greater Manchester. How much were you putting in the meter before you had the NIBI system put in?
Between £5 and £10 a week.
A week?
Yeah.
How much are you putting in now?
About 40 to 50 a week.
A week?
A week.
Today, while many of the people we spoke to then have moved on, the NIBI heating systems very much remain.
That NIBI system should never have been put in, and I don't think it's worth the money, and I just can't afford it.
To be receiving bills of over £600 for a quarter is ridiculous. I can't afford to pay those bills. I've got an outstanding bill for £1,084. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm living on the breadline.
With a number of residents still struggling to pay their energy bills, some feel the Housing Association isn't taking their concerns seriously enough.
We had no choice in this heating system. It was dumped on us. Other councils and housing associations have had these stuff in, they've had them thrown out. We're stuck with it, and we can't see an end to it. Where do we go from here?
I live here with my mum. My mum's disabled. We get bills for like £200, and it's just too much. And we never have this on because it's costing that much. We sit there at night times and we're putting duvets round us, jackets round us, jumpers and stuff like that.
Further complicating the issue is that here, following the Grenfell Tower tragedy, the external cladding has been removed from many of the homes on the estate. A welcome move for sure, but some residents claim that's had the unintended consequence of making some flats even colder. And with winter round the corner, residents like Rosemary wonder what that's going to mean for their bills.
We can't get warm because of the cladding being off the walls. There's gaps underneath the windows, there's drafts coming through. We're struggling to pay our bills. We just don't know what we're going to do.
But the Housing Association, Pendleton Together, says most residents here are feeling the benefits of their NIBI heating systems, and it's not working on any current complaints. It says monitoring has shown typical bills to be lower than the national average, and it blames those that are higher than expected on either ongoing issues with the residents' energy provider or on residents using the system in the same way that they used a traditional boiler system. It's told us that's an inefficient way to use the NIBI system, which relies on being permanently on to get the best and most cost-effective results. But if the explanation to this really is that not everyone is using it correctly, it does rather beg the question of why someone, somewhere along the line, isn't doing more to ensure that these systems are installed and operated correctly. Because we've now heard of an awful lot of people who've struggled with these heating systems, and they're usually the people who can least afford to pay any unexpected costs. So you'd expect that whatever the root of their problem turns out to be, not only can they get it resolved, but the explanation can be used to avoid further cases of this once and for all. As for Marissa and Caitlin, they're still struggling to pay off well over £1,000 of debt, and they say the whole experience has very much taken the shine off moving into their new home.
Since we've lived it, it's given us nothing but worry about money and nothing else now, all because of the NIBI system.
It's took over our whole life.
Well, NIBI has told us that its exhaust air heat pumps work brilliantly in providing affordable heating and hot water when the property is sized, installed and operated. Provided that's the case, the company says they are an energy efficient, environmentally friendly and effective heating and ventilation solution for around 20,000 properties in the UK and over 1 million homes in Europe.
Went on to reiterate that where issues occur, it's almost always due to poor specification, installation or using the wrong settings and not the systems themselves. The company says it's concerned to hear about individual cases where consumers are unhappy, but it's always ready to offer guidance on how to use the system effectively and efficiently.
Now, that's a very interesting point, because the second housing association mentioned there, Pendleton Together, told us that it's made 31 individual visits to resolve issues this year alone and can also supply residents with a series of videos on how to work the system.
Which is all well and good, but if it really is so complicated for some people to operate, no wonder they're ending up with sky-high bills and you have to feel sorry for them. Well, now we're going to go outside and see what issues Angela can resolve with our experts. Angela.
Thanks, Julia. Well, I'm joined by not just a very noisy ambulance, but also by Hannah Kent from Twickenham, who has brought this as a problem, which we hope that Sarah Pennells, who's our personal finance expert, is going to help out. It's a GoPro drone, which, as you can probably see, has got a GoPro camera on the end here. And this is a sort of remotely controlled helicopter device. And you invested £1,200 of your hard-earned money to help with your career with this, didn't you?
Yeah, so as a graduate from photography university, I decided to invest in the drone to help build my business as a sports photographer. So I bought the top spec drone that there was on the market at the time, and unfortunately it crashed.
What actually happened? How high did you get it and what were you doing?
I put it into auto takeoff and it reached not even 10 foot and just decided to cut out and crash land.
Well, we've been talking to GoPro, and as indeed have you, and GoPro have actually said no go. They're not going to give you any kind of refund because they're saying that it was probably an operator error. Did you do everything that the instruction book said?
Yes, to the T, in all the updates, all the installations, everything was as instructed.
Sarah, I know you're amazed by the way GoPro have reacted, aren't you?
I'm absolutely staggered. I mean, obviously it's possible Hannah did something wrong, but having talked to Hannah and seen how simple this is to operate, it was marketed as being something that almost a child could use. It seems really unlikely. And I am very surprised at GoPro's attitude because, in theory, you are really well protected by law, because if you buy something and it goes wrong within the first 6 months, then it's down to the company that sold it to you to prove there wasn't a problem when it sold it, rather than to you to show that there was. And as you say, it was a first flight that something went wrong. And I don't really understand why GoPro aren't sort of joining in and looking after their customer, basically. I mean, I would say that you should take things further, because this, you bought it from GoPro, it was in Netherlands was on the invoice, but under EU law, you can still enforce your rights with an EU-based company. So you could, in theory, take them to court either here or in the Netherlands. I know you paid by PayPal, but that would only protect you if the GoPro had arrived in pieces or it hadn't been as described. But as it arrived safely, PayPal won't help you on this occasion.
Will you take them to the small claims court?
Yes, of course.
Well, we hope you get your money back and that you have a very successful career. Thank you, Hannah. Thanks very much indeed. Well, we've also got Martin James with us here, who's from the consumer website Resolver, trying to resolve something we deal with on the programme all the time, which is customer loyalty, where you have a contract ongoing, it keeps going up if you don't change your supplier, whereas a new customer, you'd get it cheaper. Is anybody going to do anything about that?
Well, good news, finally they are, and we get tons of complaints about this ever since you featured it on the programme. The good news is the Ombudsman has started to uphold a few complaints about these premium hikes, and that might mean that people might be able to make all kinds of claims going back quite a way for being overcharged. Remains to be seen, but let's see what happens. The Competitions and Markets Authority is looking into other areas where overcharging might be happening, so if you feel that you've been ripped off, now is the time to put in a complaint.
Yeah, and it could be your mobile phone as well as insurance, it could be your heating, your lighting, whatever. But what can we do ourselves to help?
So it's a really good idea to switch providers wherever possible. So put a note into your calendar when your policy is due to expire. Make sure you do it a month beforehand, as you were saying earlier in the season, because then you've got time to shop around and see if you can find a better deal. But remember the golden rule, you get nothing for staying loyal.
Now, just say to them, I can get a better deal somewhere else. They change their prices dramatically, usually, don't they? Thanks very much indeed, Martin. So back to Gloria and Julia in the studio.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks to all the people who've turned up at our pop-up shop this week. Now, there are plenty of interesting stories making the news this morning. Several papers, for example, pick up a new research suggesting that sunlight is the best way to kill off some germs. The Telegraph says keeping the curtains open helps to kill bacteria and household dust. Apparently, sunshine coming in kills bacteria that causes coughing and shortness of breath, which reproduce better in the dark. I have plenty of dust anyway.
And talking of dark, a ray of sunshine for airline passengers in the Telegraph, perhaps, with this. Heathrow tests face scanners to cut check-in time by a third, according to the headline. Well, the airport is testing technology that will allow it to use your face as a sort of walking ID, cutting back on the number of times you need to show your passport and potentially reducing check-in time. It's expected to be rolled out further next year, but I want to know how it's going to cope with identical twins.
Or a face like mine at 6 o'clock in the morning when checking in. Anyway, we'll be talking about all sorts of travel issues on the programme tomorrow, including today's news of the collapse of Cyprus-based Cobalt Air. Meanwhile, though, the Mirror breaks down new figures on how much it costs to park at hospitals. So, £70 million from staff made to pay to park, it says. It's awful.
And, as it happens, that's just the latest in an ongoing controversy that we've investigated on the programme before. Watch this.
A regular bone of contention in the Rip-Off Britain inbox continues to be hospital parking charges, a topic we reported on 4 years ago. Drivers told us that the often costly and inconsistent charges are particularly unwelcome because they usually come at a time when you don't need any extra stress.
Well, my mum's just been brought in, actually, in an ambulance, so I'm trying to get into the hospital to find out, you know, what's happening. And I've just had to ferret around finding the change.
Well, in the years since then, the price to park has rocketed, with hospitals raking in a whopping £174 million from these charges just last year. And in August, the issue was back in the headlines, this time because the very last NHS hospital in Wales to charge for parking finally scrapped the policy, making Wales a hospital parking fee-free zone. With a similar picture in Scotland, that leaves England and Northern Ireland as the only parts of the UK where hospital patients, visitors and staff still face these much-hated costs whenever they park their car. Now, all morning, we've been asking you to send your questions for Sarah and Martyn. And this one actually is for you, actually, Sarah, first of all. And it's something we hear a lot about. Brian says his sister received a parking ticket after putting in her car registration incorrectly, and her appeal has been rejected. So I guess that she's paid, but the thing was wrong. So is that fair?
It's not fair, I don't think. I mean, there are lots of cases like this, and you think if you're trying to buy a ticket but you just make a mistake, you're not trying to defraud the system, you are trying to pay. I don't know whether they've complained to the parking company or to the organisation behind it. So basically, if a parking company is registered with one of two organisations, the British Parking Association or the International Parking Community, she can take her appeal to either one of those. Now, in fact, if the company isn't registered, then it doesn't have the right to pursue her through court because it can't get her details from the DVLA. So I would take it one step further if she can.
Yes, good luck to her, but stick with it.
Martyn, Leslie bought a pan online that was advertised as being suitable for induction hobs, but it wasn't, and it broke the hob, costing her over £300 to fix. But the retailer has only offered her a £20 voucher. Is that fair?
Well, absolutely not. Now, I never have this problem because I can't cook. But the fact of the matter is this is known as consequential loss. So basically, it's as a consequence of the firm misadvertising something. When businesses dig their heels in, though, it can sometimes be a bit tricky to win with a complaint. So her home insurance is a backup plan, but not until she's made a complaint about this first.
No, and they are specific hobs that need specific pans, so I appreciate that. Thanks very much indeed. As always, lots and lots of good advice.
Absolutely. And on that note, I'm afraid we have to leave it. But we'll be back tomorrow for our last live show of the week. We've had a great week.
It's come around much too soon. We're going to be looking at a planned crackdown on those dreaded cold calls.
And hearing what to do with all sorts of other things. But join us anyway. We'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.